Christopher Naum. Joining us at this special edition, we've got a combined program on our podcast here. Joining us is Chief Doug Klein with Fire and Training, and our special guest, Captain Mike Wallingford from Kentucky. I want to welcome everybody here to this edition. Certainly looking forward to having a really robust program and discussion here about building construction, fireground safety operations, and training. With that, Doug's got a little comment to make.
Chris, again, it's always good to combine the two shows with Fire and Training and taking it to the streets. We've done a number of programs, and we did a 6-part series recently that we talked a lot about different components of building construction. We'll get back into that in just a little bit. But, it's an honor and a privilege to be here in what they call the Fishbowl at FDIC, putting our shows on. And as people are buzzing the hallways and getting ready for another unfilled day here at FDIC, it's good to say that the sponsor for the studio is the programs are really brought to you by Firehouse Subs and the Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation. The big thing of it is Firehouse gives a lot of back. So enjoy more subs and save more lives. That's the key. And you can find out more about being a restaurant owner and being part of a franchiseship with them. You go to www.firehousesubfranchising.com. But thank you to Firehouse Subs for sponsoring these things. And just excited to talk about what we're talking about. It's a buzz here, Chris.
Well, certainly the crossroads out here are filling up. Everybody's getting ready to go to the class here that'll be starting up very shortly here for another fabulous day of training. And certainly, again, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the phenomenal week we all had here at FDI. Chief David Rhodes is phenomenal leader. And certainly when we talk about Diane Feldman Rothschild's involvement in putting this fabulous program together, certainly the entire FDIC advisory board, and certainly in addition, the entire Clarion staff, both on the fire engineering side, Clarion event, phenomenal opportunity. It's interesting, one of the common themes, and I've got the program in front of us here, but one of the common themes that has resonated with the entire program has dealt with train, lead, repeat, and then the one other common theme that I think resonates from the start of the program with main program is the revolution is coming. And I think we're certainly seeing that in so many different ways. And as we're going to talk about here, at least on this episode, just talking about the built environment, talking about training, talking about leadership, and certainly some of the things that both of you had the opportunity to present this week. I know that on Monday, I had the chance to present our pre-con program dealing with the building tactical risks, talking about building facts, talking about the evolving size-up issues regarding our buildings and such. And then, Doug, you led it off on Wednesday morning with your class.
Yeah, what a great day. Full room packed. They actually closed the doors. They told me there was about 100 additional people in the hallway to get into the program, which I'm deeply sad that they didn't get an opportunity to get in. But hopefully we'll be able to present that program of developing the next generation of fire service leaders. And back to your comment, Chris, when we're talking about train, lead, and then repeat, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to educate them. We're trying to diversify their experiences. So years on the job is important, but if you're repeating the same thing over and over again, it's not really experience. And the big thing I will tell you is you're at FDIC, be an opportunist. Take every opportunity so you can self-develop yourself. And then there's plenty of coaches and mentors walking these hallways. You can grab one.
There certainly is. And Mike, you did your program on the afternoon this past Wednesday.
Yep. Construction site response and tactics for success. Had a great group that afternoon. It was quite unfortunate, when you look at the schedule throughout the week, there was 3 or 4 classes, including Doug's, that I wanted to sit through, but and especially even at my time slot, there was ones I wanted to go towards, and I felt like I missed out on so much. But the lineup this week was, it's just
it's phenomenal.
It is amazing.
Yeah, it certainly was.
And you look at why do we come here? We come to recharge our batteries. We come to get educated. We come to diversify our knowledge and experiences. And, I was with you. It's like, I want to go to this. I want to go to that. And you just can't get there.
I say it's the most exhausting, recharging week of your life.
Well, that certainly is.
I
the
would
case.
agree.
Yeah. It was interesting to note here. I've got one of the pamphlets, but the 8th International Tall Building High Rise Fire Safety Conference was being conducted and hosted here at FDIC. First time ever. Normally, this program is conducted internationally, and the opportunity was made in Clarion, and again through Chief Rhodes' leadership. That conference was held in conjunction with as a separate entity, but nonetheless, that brought in leadership and individuals throughout the international fire service community worldwide here in Indianapolis, talking about the challenging issues of both super tall buildings, high rise, and fire safety. So it's really interesting to see when we take a look at the dimensions of training that was offered here during the course of the week and continue both today here on Friday as well as into a Saturday. One of the themes that obviously resonates with the three of us when we talk about the built environment, we talk about building construction, construction site safety, operational safety, training, preparation, safety, and operations. Those themes and focus areas pretty much have to do with everything on the fire ground, right? I think the one thing that many of our listeners have come to recognize is that when we discuss the built environment or we talk about the fire service, we talk about firefighting, it has everything to do with understanding the built environment, understanding the building, whether from the ground up, as Mike has coined that phrase. And I want to really reiterate that because I think it's such a fundamental element. It really is from the ground up. It's excavation and moving forward and seeing that building starting to materialize. And then as Doug and I frequently talk on our cross-pollination of our programs, we just did a 6-part series, as Doug mentioned, talking about the complexities of the commercial fire ground and talking about all facets of it, both from the operational side, the training side, the risk side, lessons and learnings from the fire ground, and so forth. So for those of you that may not be familiar with that program, if you go to the Fire Engineering Podcast Archives, our 6-part series, which just concluded a month ago, is available for you to download and listen to that. One of the other things that we had the opportunity with Mike and I talking about construction site safety in a previous program last year, which coincided with a number of events, one up in Connecticut, the other in North Carolina, dealing with significant challenges that were imposed upon that fire departments regarding a construction site failure and very challenging rescue, and the other dealing with a building construction site that was in various stages of construction that took off and certainly challenged the operations, certainly challenged the community. So let's just lead off and just talk about a couple of things, and I'll start off with Mike just talking about some of the issues that you bring forward. And I think for our listeners' standpoint, what would you say are some of the most critical bullet points when we talk about going and responding to a construction site fire or just the issues dealing with ground up? And what does that really entail?
Well, I think one of the things is it's pretty robust. It could be for a department that has 10 volunteers all the way up to the FIs that employs thousands of firefighters. There's construction going on everywhere. So the level of risk associated to each one of those organizations is vast and in different severities. But we break down what's going on behind that construction fence. Yeah. We love, if you're out and about in your districts and you're riding around, we're very hesitant to stop. We're very hesitant to talk to the individuals that are doing that because a lot of what they're doing we don't understand. Yeah. And I'm trying to promote, and it's great. Everybody talks about building construction, but not the construction of the building. And it's we want to focus on it when it's been done and we've got people occupying it. But the risk and hazards between the trenching and excavating, confined space work, people working at height and having to make rescues, it's not going to be as easy as taking that beautiful 105-foot ladder truck and pulling it right up there, because sometimes there's not roads. For that mention, sometimes there's not even addresses. So it's getting out and really knowing.
You're talking about building, initial buildings, but we know that we've had many events in America's fire service history that has had impacts from the renovation component or the changes of buildings. And one that comes to mind that I use all the time, and we've even discussed this as well, Chris, on the show, is the Vendome. Yeah. When it was under renovations, we've seen many different components, and I think Mike hit something. and I'm going to hit the training side here just to kind of back it up, is you have to be a student of your districts in the buildings. And I heard that 3 times yesterday as they were going through people and discussions, in the promo to the Lifetime Achievement Award, and people talking about things and about getting to the buildings and understanding your buildings. And we talk about it quite frequently, but I think the buzzword that was used in all 3 of those that were mentioned is your battleground. And that is the battleground. That's where we go to operate. It's where we go to fight, whatever we're fighting, whether it's a rescue, whether it's a structural collapse failure, which involves rescues, or whether it's fire.
Well, I think it's important to note that, I think if we understand that there are building life cycles to a structure, and the life cycle of the structure begins with the first excavation. It's that first site preparation. And it's inclusive of that site that has absolutely nothing done to it other than a sign saying coming soon. And you see the fence going around it. And then the first shovel is put in, or, ground bores are done all of the things from surveying to doing ground bores to figure out what the foundation is going to be all about, the structural load capacities, all the way to the first dig, excavation, framing up, occupancy. And then again, repeat, we end up having the renovation work that comes about or changes in occupancy. So as long as that building continues to exist, it is very likely that at some point in time, we need to expect that there's going to be renovations and alterations, both significant, sometimes very subtle. But with every change in that building usage from an occupancy standpoint, there's also likely, very, very likely, to be structural and things that are going to be beyond just aesthetics. And they are so going back to Mike's focal point, we need to certainly understand and comprehend all of the construction elements, which are inclusive of ground up, occupancy, and then, as Doug just mentioned, talking about the renovations, because now we have additional construction that is inclusive of adding on a roof, expanding a particular part of the building, which just is a little bit of a different facet to it, but it's right down your lane, Mike.
It's actually been kind of enlightening. Most people, when they look out of hotel windows, they want just a beautiful view. And my hotel looks out, and it's an entire construction site, and that makes me happy. So I guess everybody has their weird little things, but that was something else that kind of goes into, because when you think of building construction, and Chris, you all do a wonderful job with taking it to the streets and looking at the beautiful architecture that's 100 years old. Let's face it, the stuff that we're building today, there's a likely chance it's not going to last as long as what we're building now. So you're going to have, we are, as these generations continue, we're going to continue to see more recycling of the footprint. And I think is honestly going to, it's going to increase those hazards for every one of these departments.
That's a really, really great point. So, what we're talking about here is that we have more buildings that the recycling of that structure very well. And I think we've all seen it, where it's much easier to deconstruct the building and demolish it, take it down, and start from scratch. And we often scratch our heads at that. We've got some beautiful buildings of modern construction, certainly over the last 20, 30, or 40 years, going back into the 80s and such, and they level them down and a new constructed building goes up. So again, it's changes in what we call methods and materials of construction, or modern methods of construction, and also the innovations with new construction techniques, which go back to training needs, go back to operational preparation needs, and so forth. One of the things that we did, we rolled out here at the start of FDIC week, was our view from the streets in downtown Indy, just taking a look at, and we started posting on all of our social media platforms, and certainly here on Fire Engineering's platforms, dealing with what was going on in downtown Indy, and hopefully trying to encourage our listeners and those that were taking any variety of classes, not only our programs, but again, the programs that are in all of the various deliveries over the course of the week that dealt with building construction in some facet, whether it be an operational side or training side. But again, there was reading the building, reading the fire ground, reading smoke. There was training programs on high rise, low rise, garden apartments, and a whole variety of things that deal with that built environment. So the one aspect that I think is very, very important when we talk about training is to get out into the streets, take a look at your buildings. We've offered some insights based upon those postings that you might want to consider. Again, if you're not sure where to start, just take a look at the construction. Take a look at your window, whether it be from the front windshield, from the side of your private vehicle, or from just outside the fire station bay doors. See what's going on in your first due. And I think, Mike, you and I had a conversation just talking about the reluctance that many fire officers or chief officers may have to go out there and talk with building superintendents, talk to the job superintendents, those that are building the construction site and are fearful to enter past going from the street through into that construction site, through the fence line, and ask some simple questions. So, well, what are your takes on that?
Well, one of the very first things that I try to educate everybody on is it's all about your approach.
Yeah.
If you're going in and the chest is puffed out, and you're like, "What are you doing in my district?" or "What in my area?" Instead, it's walking in and say, "Hey, I see that y'all are built. Man, I'd love to learn more about it. What do y'all have going on? What plans to be here? Do you have some plans? We'd love to just kind of take a look. That way, in case anything was to ever happen, we're a little better prepared." When you take that kind of approach, I think there's probably not going to be a lot of site safety and or site supervisors or anything that are going to turn you down, because it's something that's going to click with them to say,
Yeah.
they just want to help us. We're not trying to be safety cops or anything like that. You just want to help, and I want to learn more.
You bring something up, and we talk about this all the time, Chris, about being in the streets in your districts and taking a look. And we know that in Florida we had a structural collapse a couple of years ago from a building that had degraded over time. So we were faced with that not long after that they were saying, "Hey, we need to evacuate this building and get people out. It's unsafe." So when we went there, as they had started renovations, we're going to reoccupy the building. They had done a lot of work underneath, and there was going to be a continued amount of work that was going on in a construction design fashion to make that building secure even more. But as I was walking around, I saw stuff I had never seen before. And this is where the train part comes in and where the leadership part comes in. And actually, they were leading us as a construction, as an engineer, as those folks, the code enforcement people even. As we were walking around and looking at that, I'm like, you got this, what's this for? How does this work? And then they started talking about the cost associated to the building. I'm like, what would it take to just remove this building and bring it down? They told me the cost was actually more expensive to tear the building down and to get rid of it than it was to make the repairs and to rejuvenate that building. So we learned some things building construction wise I had no clue, and you're probably not going to find in the textbook.
And
that's key.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think Mike, has this phenomenal insights when we take a look at being a construction safety professional and also being a professional firefighter, being on the career side. That opportunity, as all of us bring perspectives in relative to building construction based upon our backgrounds and such. But again, it's so important because you have to gain that degree of literacy. You need to, as a company officer, certainly as a commanding officer, you need to have a depth and degree of knowledge that equates back to the complexity of the buildings that are under construction, as well as the types of buildings that are in your jurisdiction. So that goes back to fundamentally understanding how the buildings are constructed and built, how they go together, and then how they are affected by firefighting, which we constantly talk about in our programs. And again, I think it's that reluctance with that fear factor that we're going to go in and we want to identify deficiencies. We want to be the safety individuals. I think the best way to pursue it, and the best way to achieve the most valuable return, just go in, ask the questions in a manner that you can learn. And that now becomes, we're the students, we're looking at the professionals, the engineers, the foremen, superintendents, any of those individuals that are part of the crafts and the trades, to understand different facets, whether they are pouring concrete, whether they are doing excavation work, whether they are pouring concrete, whether they are framing out. Iron workers are in there. or finishing off the building all the way through the occupancy stages. The certificate of occupancy and the building goes up. So we need to be aware of all elements.
And you know what? One stop won't get it either. You know, if you stop early in the in the construction phase, you go back 2 weeks later, and a lot has changed. And the risks, the hazards have changed because we're in a different phase of the construction project. You know, whether we're still underground or we've gotten ourselves to the slab and we're ready to go vertical with things.
I think it's safe to say too, when we take a look back over the last 18 to 24 months, and I think we're even pushing that on the low to the last 36, especially with construction-based fires that have been occurring across the United States. We've seen an adverse trend of those, unfortunately, within a particular segment of construction types and occupancy buildings. But again, when we have a wood frame structure or we have a hybrid structure that has a variety of different construction materials going into it, once we start getting into the framing phase, wood framing, exposed wood framing, the continuing challenges when we take a look at applying the appropriate codes for temporary fire protection, fire separation, goes well beyond just having a fire extinguisher, hopefully having a safety plan and evacuation plan, but we constantly see these issues. So again, for our listeners that are out there, it's imperative to also ask some leading questions. Ask about, do you have an up-to-date evacuation plan? What is your fire protection plan? And more importantly, I think this goes back fundamentally to a conversation all three of us have had. What is the availability and the reliability of water supply on that site? What are the temporary measures that are put into place as systems become integrated and operational? But it's one thing to have a system installed. It's another thing to have water flowing and have that operable. So we talk about hydrants. We talk about either temporary or the permanent fixed systems as the building, especially if the building has some degree of height. What are the availability of standpipes, temporary standpipes in particular, so that I have the ability to bring water in from curbside or from mudside, wherever we may be positioning that apparatus upon arrival, recognizing there may not be surface treatments and so forth. Where you position that engine is going to be where it's going to go, and getting that water to the building. So, what are both of your takes? So both of you have had extensive experience talking about construction sites. Certainly, we take a look at the things, Doug, in your jurisdiction. There's such a tremendous degree of constant construction, predominantly within the residential multiple occupancies that makes up Horry County and so forth. And then Mike, certainly with the whole variation of what you're dealing with from your construction site background in terms of the job, as well as the response. So when we talk about preparation, what do you think are some of the biggest issues that are out there? Is it compliance? Is it making sure that the phasing matches up with the fire risks and so forth? So
I think it's a conglomerate of everything, Chris. And in my world, everything is in a growth pattern. And when I talk about a growth pattern, we got from our planning division to us was there were 150,000 open building permits. And that's probably 5 years worth of building without any problem, but 150,000 open. Now, those building permits go anywhere from mid-rise to high-rise structures that are going to be resort oceanfront all the way to the 1,500 square foot home that's being built. But there's one thing that I can tell you that we get into in the thought process, and it just resonated to me, and I saw a couple of people walk by on the outside. FDIC and Chief Rhodes and Diane, the whole team that does the advisory board, Clarion, the events, everything pulled together. And if you go in and you really look, and if you're not here at FDIC, please make preparations to come next year. Find a way. Everything we're talking about here, every aspect of this conversation is in a classroom. Somebody that has expertise in that area is talking about that. And it goes from the code enforcement side, it goes to tall buildings, it goes to construction site operations, it goes to your building side, how do we develop people. And one of the things in my development plan for folks is they have to understand building construction. We even have that in our plan, with the department, that you have to have a strong building construction class, and we hand select what we want. And It's got to be a good program that comes from the National Fire Academy. It's got to be a collegiate level program, which I know the books that Pesci's using, all the way up to when we're talking about fire suppression systems, to standpipe systems, and even talking about the systems that need to be going in these multi-story buildings that you can't get anybody to jump at. And the Air Coalition with Mike Gagliano and all those folks, that's an important aspect because we talk about getting water someplace, whether it's we're hoisting 3-inch lines up on, making portable standpipes during the construction phase. But once you get up there, they talked about it in the main program about the mask. When you deplete that cylinder, and if you are operating up there, how fast can you get to another cylinder you may have brought up with you, or how easy is it to go tie into a system, charge your cylinder to be able to go back and do work? Now, there's consequences that go with that, obviously, from an anatomical component with pathophysiology and how we stress firefighters. But if you can't breathe, you can't fight fire.
Right.
So I think part of what we've really got to begin doing, and I encourage everybody to do this, is you got to look at every aspect of what's going to be happening in your district, from pulling up, mud roadside, whatever it may be, to how you access it, how you get your hose lines there, what's the building, how it's going to perform. That's key. We go back to air and vintage. That's some of our terminology that we use. When was it built? What's the design features? And for us, a lot of what I'm running into is it's new. And the predictability of those and those new buildings is there. And we know that the predictability is they're not going to be stable for a long period of time versus, an earlier era and vintage.
Yeah, we and when we talk about some of the things that we need to look at throughout those processes, and you talk about the training, and one of the amazing parts of this week was I was sitting there in the instructor room the other day, just kind of going over where everything's together, and I, in there, and all of a sudden, Jonah comes walking up, and he's like, "Hey, that's my Charlotte, that's my place." He's like, "Would you like more pictures? Would you like more videos?" I was like, "Well, absolutely, I would like more videos to expand on this," because that was a huge risk. And we talk about these buildings under construction and how quickly fire is going to spread when we don't have suppression systems. And one of the things that we try to bring up is rescue. Well, what do you mean rescue? Well, there's people working in these buildings, and unfortunately, we lost two contractors or on cranes as well. What a wonderful job. I mean, those guys were behind the eight ball from the word jump. And when you see some of the video from afar as the guys are responding, or it's just overwhelming. And you think about accountability, and Chief from New Haven said the same thing. I've got a bunch more stuff on that concrete collapse and all of the challenges that they had. How many other departments throughout the U.S. are sitting on their hands and not out in their districts and don't understand that those things are going on?
And Chris, we even talked about this with the Raleigh fire, where they basically took a building which was sitting on a city block, and then they lost, across the street they had damage. They lost other components of buildings, and it was all because of a fire in a construction phase, just the same as in Charlotte. And honestly, I want our listeners to know this is looming. It's not if, but when it can occur in your district, and you've got to be prepared for that.
Yeah, Phoenix just had a couple, a row of homes under construction, and it started in one and spread to others. And one of the eeriest pictures for me is the hydrant sitting in the front yard of one of those places that no one's hooked to because there's not water there.
No water.
Yeah, no
And
water.
that's a key item. So, we talk about a lot of different aspects here, from the construction, the renovation, the building phasing conditions, and obviously talking about the built environment with occupied structures. The one thing that is common to all of them is the arrival sequence. One of the things that many of our listeners should be very familiar with, certainly by now, over the last number of years on our programs, we've talked about the building facts concept or model, dealing with that first arriving, construction, tactics, and safety. And that is a common theme that we continue to talk about here in this episode on our show, talking about construction that influences decision-making of tactics, that influences safety, of which safety has the risk component. So again, these are integrated in such a manner that we, the fire service, sometimes seldom takes a look at them in that fashion. We only see a construction site. We only see a building that says, vacant or, coming soon,
Opening soon.
or
Yeah.
we see the building that's occupied, or we only pay attention to the building when what? We arrive on scene
We're ready to
and
do
we
our
go
pre-plan.
get ready to
We're
go
gonna
to
do our
work.
pre-plan.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, that's all I can see it, but we do. And again, I would pose the question, how many departments are out there adequately preparing and gathering building intel, capturing it in whatever database, whether it be the older databases of hard copies in the rigs, or utilizing the computer-aided integrated systems that many municipalities finally have achieved. I think if we can recognize that this is really a much easier task than it used to be, working with your buildings, those departments, the planning departments, much of what now is readily being submitted are not role blueprints that are being submitted and we rolled out and looked at. These are all electronically developed and produced and submitted data that readily is transferable to the appropriate databases that a fire department may not have or may have. So the seamlessness of what is available from a technology standpoint, and then being able to have that accessible to what? Your cell phones,
Oh,
your
absolutely.
tablets, and any of the other devices that are out there makes life much easier.
Oh, yeah.
Even if nothing else, getting your smartphone out, you arrived on scene, pulling up your Google Maps or pulling up any of
look
the
at an
appropriate
area view.
mapping
Yeah.
systems that are available, GSI, that kind of data can give you that 360 view, give you that bird's eye view, and guess what? It doesn't take much if you have an individual or get a chief to start pulling up some information on that building with a couple of keystrokes to give you that building intel. So
Yeah,
it's very, very
hard
important.
to envy people. Yeah, it's hard to think about what some of the people further before me, the challenges that you had in the information age of trying to keep up with that.
I'm laughing here. So Doug's laughing a little bit too. So I'll just date myself again. I was one. So in a previous era of time, working as an architect, again, we would produce, volumes and pages and pages and pages of hand-drawn, drafted documents. And this is the pre-CAD era, guys. And then have those reproduced at a company, and they would reproduce hundreds of full versions of that entire building. And many times, again, here's the architectural set of prints. Here's the mechanical set of prints. Here's the structural. Here's the plumbing. I mean, every discipline had significant volumes of pages. All of those would be rolled up, put into boxes, and then delivered to the authority having jurisdiction, of which that building official now had this box of that particular project. So, Dougie, when you talk about, having a backlog of 1,500, you would be filling up rooms full of those blueprints. And again, someone would sit there with their felt tip pen and go through that and the codes and so forth. Now, there are integrated programs that allow all of that to be very quickly analyzed in a very, very efficient manner. So a lot has changed.
Just to point something out, this is really cool. We can see out. Y'all were looking at us, and it's kind of a pretty well set up set, but we've got windows that we can look through. And, I talk about in training the curiosity of knowing, the curiosity of learning. I just happened to see an Indianapolis firefighter, and obviously he had his young child out there in the hallway that was exploring, and just every little thing he was attentive to that aspect of. He would look, he would go touch, he would walk over here, he would walk over there. So one of the things that I want to say to our listeners is we have got to be those children, quote unquote, those infants that are exploring. And that was probably what I watched him for a second. It was like, this kid is really cool, but that's what we need to be. We need to be like out of the movie number 5. And a Short Circuit was the name of the movie. Need more input.
That's right.
And I think that's what we've got to do. And technology today allows us to do so much more. I remember having volumes of pre-plans. because of a university and all this stuff. And I mean, I'd
Binders
have
and
volume one,
binders, yeah.
volume two, and I knew which one to go to. Everything was alphabetical order, and it was like, holy cow! Now you just hit a button and poof, it pops up on the MDT. Those type of things. And I think we've got to get that curiosity back in our people from the perspective of not only training but education and knowledge and perception of what we're really seeing.
Well, I think it's the excitement level. So, for the three of us, we go out, we see a building, either under construction or built. And again, I'm sometimes crossing the street to go look at something, not paying attention to the vehicles that are driving by. I just have this desire to go look at that particular structure. Again, we need to instill that kind of desire and understanding that it's so important. And looking at the building, going beyond it, going inside of that structure, going and looking at the structural anatomy, looking at how the building was built, how it's being occupied, both the footprint, the layout, construction features, and so forth. And it goes back to, again, I'll just put that same adage out there. Building construction is as fundamental to structural firefighting as water is to fire suppression. If we don't understand how to get water, we're dead in the water, literally, on the fire ground regarding firefighting operations. We don't understand the building, and we're arriving on scene that first 10 to 15 minutes of operations. Again, we may have a lot of brute force. We put all of that effort into it, but just think about how better we can be efficiently, how better the public can be served if we have a higher heightened degree of knowledge of that. Building intel is so readily accessible and available. And again, fundamentally, just understanding, having some perception of that building in terms of what to look for is going to be very important. So many of our programs, many of our podcasts provide some insights along those ways to try to simplify a very complex profession, a very complex technology. When we talk about building construction, it's certainly not a easily comprehensible subject matter. Sometimes it's much easier to learn about how to stretch a line and how to put a mask on, but it's really stretching a line and going into the building. That is the simplest part of it all. And the most challenging part from a command officer standpoint, and certainly from a company officer standpoint, is to be effectively able to size up that building, look at the parameters, whether it's in the ground, coming out of the ground, or in many of our instances, that occupied structure. So some really, really good insights as we get into this conversation.
And I think it really comes back to being that leader, especially as a company officer. Company officers are the true trainers of the fire service. They're the ones who spend the most time with you. They're the ones that are leading you, quote unquote, into battle. They're the ones that need to be out there with you and educating. I think it comes back to that. I think that our company officers need to be strong leaders, and I think they need to understand that role. That's, to me, so critical.
It's no different than the theme, right? So the theme of FDIC, train, lead, repeat. And it falls right in line with all of it.
And being that strong leader really helps out bringing up those individuals under you too. If you're being that leader and you're feeding them, and you tell them it's okay, go out, learn more, something, bring it back to it, give them those opportunities. What do they become when you're ready to ride off into the sunset? But they become hopefully great replacements for you, and you're going to leave them better than, of course, you found them. But you talk about building construction. I thought of Steve Chikarotis yesterday when he was speaking on being, a 3-year guy on, and they're in that fire and that bowstring truss, building. And he says, Lou says, hey, it's time to go. And he says, hey, I think we've got this. And he said, his expeditious to get out. And shortly thereafter, the collapse happened.
And that it's not only knowledge, but it's wisdom.
Yes.
Wisdom of knowing, wisdom of things that are keying in. And I think that's something that we have to look at as well.
Well, it's wisdom, it's training, it's experience, it's all of those factors. I think it's very, very important when we talk about our bosses, when we talk about company officer and commanding officers having a higher degree of insight, being able to look at the big picture from an operational perspective, and having knowledge. I mean, you cannot detract from the need to have education and knowledge, whether it be history, repeating events, predecessors, understanding things that are currently impacting the fire service, as well as things in the past. So as we get into our closing comments here, as we wrap up our very, very, very short program here, again, for our listeners, we've got a tremendous archive of podcasts that are available on fire engineering podcast series, and not our series, Doug's programs, our programs on the buildings on fire, but also the wealth of programs from our other colleagues that make up the entire cadre of instructors that are presenting and delivering their podcast and webcast programs. There's a wealth of insights that are either construction-based, incident command-based, tactically based, so everything from the codes, the operational side, and everything in between. But again, going back to the theme of train, lead, and repeat, and our conversation here on building construction for the built environment and operational perspectives, I'll ask the two of you just a couple of closing comments. Doug, will ask your comments. When we talk about the built environment, talk about what we've experienced here from FDIC Week, from the training side, what are your major takeaways?
Well, I think anything you want to explore or expand your knowledge on is located here. One of the things that I'm going to throw out, Chris, and I'm going to go just a little bit off the beaten path, and I think we need to say this again. My last show that we did, you actually joined in from an expert side of knowledge, is the changes that are sitting right in front of us with the 29 CFR 1910-156, which is the fire brigade standard that's being updated and proposed, and changes that are in there. 608-page document that is going to impact American fire service more than people think. Digesting that to the degree that we digested it, it's significant. And I would encourage your folks to make sure you're paying attention to what's going on, because that one came out of left field. There was no indications. Nobody was talking about it, and all of a sudden it popped up. We've been fortunate to get an extension on that until June, but you need to be digesting and commenting, on that, because it is significant and it's going to impact the fire service, tremendously. And one of the things that we talk about, every aspect of training here is wrapped into most everything they're relating to NFPA standards now.
That's good from the training side of it. Mike, from the preparation side, especially from the ground up.
Yeah.
Again, I'll just
it's really going to come down to getting out and understanding, and getting out and talking to and seeing and look at the resources you have in your districts. For instance, I have a United Rentals Trench Safety Division in Louisville. There's plenty of people that rent trench boxes and so on and so forth. Stop and talk to them. They're wonderful resources. Stop and talk to these construction
and
companies.
they have wonderful training opportunities.
Absolutely.
And again, I've been a recipient of that.
Yes.
So again, I don't think our listeners recognize how much availability of training, available training is available online through organizations, through various vendors, through various contractors and so forth, that really lessen the impact on training divisions. So, Doug's talking about preparation and training. There's some stuff out there that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think there's a tremendous degree of cadre of individuals and companies and vendors. So,
and they want to help.
Very much so.
They want to help.
Absolutely.
It's those relationships.
Absolutely.
That's what's gonna help your success is good, strong relationships within your community.
So again, training, take a look at preparation. And I think the other part of that is the operational side. I think one of the things that we continue to convey is you've got to get yourselves out into the streets and look at your built environment. Ask the questions for either building owners, the lessees, occupants, anyone that may be there. Take the opportunity to get into any and all of your buildings. I think the true measure of to be an effective company and commissioned officer on today's fire service and today's fire ground is to understand your buildings intimately. You need to have both building and fire literacy. And I would say this, I think for all of us that have trained and been able to travel around the United States, there's a fine line that exists. And I think we are functionally illiterate. We know enough to get by, not nearly enough to be able to truly do the job in the highest degree of safety and managing that level of risk. But again, I would encourage our listeners, as we've been talking about, get out there and take a look at those opportunities, whether the ground is being just spaded, that first excavator is getting that first load of dirt onto the dump truck, or it's being framed out, or it's occupied, existing, or being renovated through that process. It's so imperative to understand the construction of our buildings, understand their predictability of performance. All buildings are predictable in terms of how they will perform on the fire ground if we understand some very basic premises of the construction, the methodologies, and the manner that are pretty much error-driven for the vintage. When were they built, and how does that material method of construction at that time affect them? And then more importantly, going forward, relative to how long they've been built or existing, what are the changes that we have to look at? So as we wrap up our program here, certainly want to thank our listeners. We want to thank everyone at FDIC to continue our opportunities to present. It's been a phenomenal week to present in the classroom. It's been a phenomenal week to be a student in the classroom on both sides of the fence, and certainly want to extend our heartfelt thanks again to Chief David Rhodes for those opportunities, and for everyone in the entire FDIC family, Clarion family, for this phenomenal opportunity. Another great FDIC week is coming to a close tomorrow. There's certainly all day today and all day into Saturday throughout the afternoon to still come about if you're local, take into account some of the programs, and certainly prepare for next year's FDIC programs that I'm sure are going to exceed expectations from this year. So again, I want to thank our listeners on behalf of all three of us. Thanks everybody for continuing to listen to both our programs on Buildings on Fire, Taking It to the Streets, Chief Klein's Fire and Training, and certainly for the up and coming individual here who, again, I think from the ground up, want to really stress that little verbiage and that pointages of some good things coming up. So closing comments?
We just appreciate everybody, that's taking care of us here, that have gone to classes and listened to our shows. I'll tell you, train hard, train often. Find anything you can for knowledge, because knowledge is power, and then share it. That's where the power comes from.
Mike?
Honestly, we don't know what we don't know until it happens to us. So let's definitely get out there and learn more about what's going on in our district.
Very good. And again, on behalf of everyone from Taking It to the Streets, this is Chris Naum signing off. We'll see you somewhere next time in the streets. Stay safe, everyone, and thanks again.